This leads expectations are high as G7 leaders meet in Kananaskis in Canada. Members include Canada, the UK, US, France, Germany, Italy and Japan. Invited guests include South Africa, Ukraine, Mexico, India, Brazil and South Korea. The focus is on peace, security, critical minerals and job security, or job creation rather. SABC News correspondent Nick Harper joins us now live from a G7 summit in Canada. Nick, a very good afternoon to you. So this gathering is important, of course, for South Africa, given its G20 presidency, but it's also an equally big moment for Canada's Mark Carney. Speak to us about what's at stake.
Yeah, very interesting. The fact that those two leaders have already met. They sat down for a bilateral meeting on Sunday evening, really one of the first bilateral engagements taking place here. And they spoke about the fact that they have that shared responsibility for leading international summits this year. Canada with the G7, South Africa with the G20. And President Ramaphosa said in remarks ahead of that meeting when he was speaking to Mark Carney that South Africa essentially had come here to learn. A joke that Mark Carney enjoyed. The two men are having really quite a warm welcome between the two of them. And they spoke about their joint respect for each other and the fact that the two countries have worked closely together. Mark Carney saying that the world was in South Africa's hands at a crucial time, referencing the G20 summit coming up in November's the Leaders Summit in Johannesburg. Also saying that ties between the two countries are great. In response, President Ramaphosa said that they had a long relationship, and he also said that they were very proud of the way that they dealt with each other. That seemed to be a veiled swipe at the recent meetings that both leaders have had with the US President Donald Trump, both of them enduring rather strained meetings in the Oval Office. Of course, that one with President Ramaphosa, and President Trump saw those unfounded allegations by the US President of white genocide taking place in South Africa at the moment against white farmers. So it was very clear when Mark Carney and Mr. Ramaphosa met each other that they were allies together, pushing back against what they've seen coming from America, coming from Washington. And of course, remember, we have had repeated comments from the US president about his desire to annex Canada and make it the 51st US state. It'll be interesting to see whether Donald Trump repeats those remarks on Canadian soil in the next few minutes when he and Mark Carney sit down for their bilateral meeting.
Of course, Ukraine is also an invited guest here, so one would imagine trade disputes as well as international conflicts are expected to also take a center stage. I mean, of course, Volodymyr Zelensky will also be in attendance. Speak to us about that dynamic.
Yeah, it's always a case that these big multilateral annual summits try to deal with the most pressing issues facing the world. And as you mentioned, there are certainly plenty at this moment. Let's speak about Ukraine first of all. President Volodymyr Zelensky is here. Day 2 of the summit on Tuesday will largely focus on the issue of Ukraine, as well as Cyril Ramaphosa. There are many other world leaders who've been invited to take part in day 2 of the meetings, and they will focus on Ukraine and really trying to find a way forward to end that more than 3-year conflict. There is reportedly a push underway to try and reduce the amount of money that Russia can make from selling oil around the world, trying to put a cap on the price of a barrel of oil that Russia sells. The big problem, though, with that dynamic is what we've seen unfolding in the Middle East between Israel and Iran over the last few days. That flare-up in tensions, the strikes and counter-strikes still taking place today. All of that has pushed up the price of oil, perhaps making it harder to put that price cap on Russian oil. That flare-up between Iran and Israel will be talked about, and we have heard in the last few minutes that reportedly a draft joint statement has been put together by the G7 nations, calling for de-escalation, calling for maximum restraint, saying that Iran should never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon, but also saying that Israel has the right to defend itself. It is a draft statement, but we're also hearing that at this stage the US President Donald Trump has not signed off on that. They will be looking at that, and then of course the issue of global trade. Donald Trump has thrown a tremendous spanner in the works in recent recent months, with that trade war started against every country around the world with those tariffs in place. That, of course, creating friction as the G7 leaders meet, because he's imposed tariffs against every single one of those G7 countries that he will be meeting with during the summit.
Nick, thank you so much for that update. SABC News correspondent Nick Harper joining us there, of course, for the G7 summit in Canada with that beautiful backdrop there in Kananaskis.